Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are excited to spend some time with you talking through diversity and inclusion, kind of where we are, where we want to go, how to get started, how to think about these things, how to put some business imperatives around these things when we're thinking about the emerging workforce, the emerging marketplace, all the dynamics that are involved with diversity and inclusion. My name is Chris Bintliff. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for the Kaleidoscope Group. I'm coming at you live from near Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Orlando Bishop.
Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here and be a part of this conversation. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. So just wanted to dive in here and looking forward to chatting it up like we just do when we're hanging out and talking about some of these issues ourselves.
And our colleague, Kevin, will be joining us throughout the morning. He is in Charlotte. So we are a Chicago-based organization, but we've got talent all over the country. So let's just talk a little bit about the Kaleidoscope Group. Want to share a little bit about us. We're a full service D&I consulting firm in Chicago. Our CEO is the one and only Doug Harris, who is a nationally recognized expert in D&I. We're a certified minority owned business, and we've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing this for more than 30 years. Doug likes to say this work has always been important and rewarding. It used to be fun, and now it's necessary. And I think that's an interesting way of thinking about that. And we've got strategic alliance partners to help us out along the way with some specializations that happen sometimes with the work that we do. So before we get started with our sort of interesting conversation today, we just want to know a little bit about you. So we've got a quick poll question that we want to ask, and we just would love to know kind of where are you? Are you just getting started thinking about D&I in your organization? Are you an organization that's tried a couple things, but nothing's really stuck, or maybe we've had a speaker or a presenter or something like that, or we know where we want to go, but we're just not really sure how to get there? Or are you an organization that has a plan and you're ready to go and you're enthusiastic and you've got the right things in place and you just can't wait to get started? Just a quick moment. Tell us just a little bit about you.
Yes, so you should be able to just click buttons there on your screen. Just go ahead and submit your answer to us, and we'll put the results up on the screen here in just a moment. And this will help us tailor our conversation today so that we can make it most relevant for you. I'm sure everyone is very diverse in their organizations with the levels of diversity inclusion that they have, kind of like how we are geographically spread out all over the country today. So we're interested in your opinion. Okay, we'll give you just about 5 more seconds here, and then we'll go ahead and show the results. Okay, and here we go.
Really interesting. So we've got a nice spectrum. We've got a lot of folks who kind of know where they want to go, but they're not sure how to get there. That's excellent. And some of you are ready to rock. You've got a plan, you're ready to go. And then there's a nice group that are just getting started or have tried a few things. So that's great. There's going to be something for everybody in this conversation today, and we're excited to get into that. So I guess where a good place to start is let's just kind of build some baseline understanding of what we're talking about. So Orlando, diversity has become in some ways even a polarizing word lately, and I think that that's a little bit lacking perspective, because diversity is just a fact. It
Right.
doesn't matter what we think about it. Our organization is full of diversity. Some of that is diversity we can see, like the color of our skin. Some of it is stuff we can't, like maybe our religion or how we identify gender. And some of that is not those big topics that we're always thinking about. Some of that diversity is just our style, or how we like to give or receive feedback, or how we like to participate in things. That's just a fact. But inclusion is a strategy. Inclusion is a choice. Inclusion is deciding to do something with the diversity, or lacking inclusion is deciding not to do something with that diversity. What's your perspective on some of that as a D&I expert when we think about diversity and inclusion, and what those terms mean for us in business today?
Absolutely. Well, the way you pointed out is great, or the way you frame it is great, which is that diversity is. Right. And so that's just where we are. It's sort of like being upset about gravity or any other number of things that are just realities of our life. So what we're talking when we get to inclusion is taking things to another level and really making sure that we get the most out of everyone around us and that we're getting the best results possible. The way I've heard it described that's really helpful is that diversity is in who's invited to, getting people invited to the dance, right? That's everybody in the room once we have the dance. But inclusion is inviting people to dance. And once we get everybody out there dancing, then we get quite a party going on. And organizations that are able to do that in terms of taking advantage of cultural background, taking advantage in terms of gender perspective, taking advantage generationally, taking advantage all those ways. Once all those people are out on the dance floor, so to speak, then we start to see, and the statistics are out there, that we see higher rates of profit and return, that we see higher levels of productivity, engagement down the line, all those things that we talk about, innovation, all those things that we talk about as being critical to business success. Many of them are, if not driven by, certainly helped by inclusive cultures being developed, fostered, and continued as the business is growing.
And what I love about what you're sharing with that is we, in today's socio-political business climate, you know, every other headline, every other tweet, every other conversation is coming from a perspective of damage control or of crisis, which that's a reality, that's important stuff, but it can shift our perspective of diversity and inclusion into one of almost liability or almost protectionism or defense. When really, and one of the things I think we really want to encourage today as we're talking is inclusive strategies can lead to positive business impact, can lead to positive bottom line impact, and a better understanding, as you pointed out, of your workforce and of your marketplace and of your innovative strategies and all these things. So as you're thinking about diversity and inclusion, is there some guidance that you think we want to make sure that people are understanding from just their perspective? If you're thinking about D&I as just kind of a, if we don't have this, we could be in big trouble, I think you're missing the big picture.
Absolutely, and I think that also leads to a certain siloed quality to D&I work. It's sort of something we have to do. It's the box we have to check. It's the seminar we had to, you know, go to 3 years ago, and we're going to do another one this year, and or you know, some videos online that we're going to have play in the background so that we can say that we did it, or so that we're checked off on some database. What we really want to be doing is moving to a place where we don't have those pieces to react to. We're not needing literally remedial work, because what we're doing is proactively getting out there and getting the most out of everybody in the organization. So if I said to you, for example, that every time I order a pallet of paper, that I go out into the parking lot and burn half of it, you probably would feel that that was not a great business strategy, right? We don't go around wasting our resources as a business. We don't toss money out the window either. But what we do is we often waste our human resources, and we let talent go by the board. We miss out on talent that's out in the market when we're getting people into our organization. But even within our organizations, by not creating an inclusive environment, we don't invite innovation, new ideas, new perspectives, new viewpoints that might help to shine light into a blind spot, or identify unbelievable opportunities. And the stories are out there, whether it's, you know, the flavor of chip, or it's the new hair product from a company, or what have you. The stories are out there of organizations where there was real listening happening, and there was real value placed on what everybody brought to the organization, and where there were tremendous leaps forward on a business level, never mind on a human level, based on developing and keeping these inclusive practices going. So whether it's seeking feedback, giving feedback, what have you, there are all sorts of tangible steps that we can put in place around it. But we want to be doing those things for the greater good, yes, but also for the good of our company. And the companies that don't do this, as our workforce, one, becomes more diverse, and two, becomes more aware of diversity and more clear around what that means and what inclusion should look like, the companies that don't do it are simply going to get left behind. They're just going to lose. You cannot, you can't work at 50% while everyone else is working at 100% and expect that to be a winning strategy. It really doesn't matter how talented, how much talent you've got in that 50%.
That's a really good perspective. Oh, and I think it's a good place to start some discussion around how inclusive strategies for your diversity in your organization. Sometimes I'm thoughtful about couching everything in this phrase, diversity and inclusion, like it means everything. Where if we break that down, what do we mean? we mean being strategic about your inclusive behaviors around the diversity of your organization, but where attracting or keeping or expanding your talent is concerned. So I've got some statistics I want to throw at you. You know,
Okay.
hiring is a concern for a lot of organizations today. Hiring great talent, finding great talent, the job market is such where that's difficult. But then we're going to invest all kinds of resources into that talent, and we're losing great talent. People of color are 1/3 of the labor force.
Right.
And women are half, or 52% of the labor force. But women are dramatically underrepresented in the C-suite, for instance,
Right.
or leadership. And people of color, I've got an interesting statistic here about resumes, and job seekers with white-sounding names get 1 callback per 10 resumes, while applicants with African-American sounding names get 1 callback per 15 resumes. Now that introduces all kinds of other topics that we can kind of expand into, but what effectively is happening is we're cutting our labor pool in half because we're only considering, for whatever reason, certain applicants. And then what happens on the other end of that is, for instance, 10% of LGBT talent have left a job that was not welcoming. So that's like your best engineer or your best sales rep or your very best manager who gets the most out of people simply find that this place isn't for them. So we've got 2 issues. One is we're not attracting because we're not opening our opportunity pool.
Right.
And then we're not keeping. And either this is because we have just kind of not taken this idea of inclusive strategies seriously from a business perspective, which is one sort of flaw, or another is we actually have an actively kind of hostile environment for people. Maybe we don't even mean to, but that's happening. What's some of the perspectives that you have on that, and what guidance can we give to people right now on the webinar?
Right.
Here's one way to think about this right now. So after this webinar, you could actually put this small thing into motion to help expand your talent pool.
Well, one thing that we can do is the hiring process obviously is critical, right? I mean, if you're going to cook any meal, we start with the best ingredients. And so we want to get out there and make sure that we're doing just that we're getting the best people. And so the gender dynamic that you brought up is one where we should really start. It is clear, the statistics are there, that organizations that have women on the board, I believe the number is 3 or more, are performing at a higher level. I want to say about 35%, something in that 35% higher levels of return or revenue being generated. So again, we want to come at this from a business perspective. We're running businesses, right? We're not necessarily looking to cure the world. We want to get clear on what's it going to take to get out into that marketplace. Maybe there are things that we're valuing in the interview process, right? A simple, I like that guy. It's not necessarily a nefarious thing. Sure, there are people out there who are actively saying, I don't want a woman in this role, or I don't want an African-American in this role, or I don't want, and that's a conversation that we can possibly have some of today. But I think for a lot of the people we encounter, and a lot of the organizations we encounter, there just may be elements of hire like me that we're not even recognizing. I'm a big sports fan. If I bump into another sports fan, we tend to hit it off. We might have a little running joke. Maybe our teams are rivals, and so we give each other a little bit of a hard time. We have fun. All of a sudden, I like that guy. Well, that's great, but I'm not running the Knicks, right? I'm running, So what I'm really looking for, I got to get clear about in that hiring process. Maybe it's having a blind resume type of setup in terms of when we're first getting people in. Maybe it's looking at who's a part of the interview process. Diversity there might give us different perspectives. Even in something as simple as this person didn't seem engaged. Well, maybe they're an introvert, right? Another group that's underrepresented as you move up the ranks in organizations are introverts. So if you have some introverts or some extroverts who are conscious, right, of that dynamic in the interview process, there might be a whole part of your interview process that's written. Who said everything has to happen in that office, right? You find these ways to engage people on a different level. And what you do is you have the bias that might come out. You point out the statistic with the resumes and the names. what you do is recognize that unconscious bias could be a part of that. And I'll talk about what specifically that is, but it's bias we're unaware of, the things that sometimes we respond to without even knowing. And we put things in place to check ourselves, just to make sure that those things aren't coming into place. And we really are looking for people who have the skill set and the qualities that are going to serve us in the role, not necessarily that make us the most personally comfortable in an interview situation. So in terms of getting the right people in, that's critical. Now, in terms of keeping the right people, retention, now we're moving into two levels of conversation. One, every time someone leaves, and I don't have to tell those who are in HR or even in leadership this, every time someone leaves, there are all sorts of costs. We've now got to go out and find someone new. That might mean finding, a service that's going to bring us the talent, or it's going to mean us going out into the world, marketing, what have you, to find the right person. We've got to go through the interview process. That means that there's going to be time devoted by the people within our organization that could be spent on other things, now filling that new position. Once a new person comes in, they're not just going to hit the deck running like that person who left the door, went out the door. Now we've got to train that person. So let's say, depending on the job, it takes 3 months, 6 months, a year to get to where that person's, going at 100%. Can we really afford that on a regular basis? And would we choose to do that when some of the practices that we're talking about are simple? They're simple fixes, but it's just a matter of doing these things consistently and consciously, making sure that people have a seat at the table, making sure that we're hearing from different people within the organization, making sure that we're expressing that we appreciate and recognize the value they bring to the organization. These things are critical. Now, another level of cost is this. I tell a story sometimes. I was at an organization, not going to name the organization, but I was in a conference room, and some guys were hanging out, and I was easily the most junior person there, and someone made a gay joke. And what's interesting about that, I'm not gay, and I think they assessed that no one in the room was gay, and so they could make that joke. But what came through to me was, guess what? When you leave the room, the black jokes will start. And what we don't want to do is create an atmosphere where people feel that that's okay, that that's condoned, that that's encouraged, that that's seen as funny, right? Because what we're doing is creating a situation where people realize, I better watch my back as well. And we want to create, you're not going to have an inclusive culture where people don't trust one another. So we want to make sure that we're in that trusting space. And when someone walks out the door around these kinds of issues, believe me, conversations happen. The meetings after the meetings happen. And so there's a level of disengagement that we're now going to be dealing with within our organizations. And again, so often these things are not intentional, blatant attempts to cause harm. But that doesn't mean the harm isn't caused, and that doesn't mean that the cost isn't paid.
And it can create a cycle, So when we talked about retention and then attracting, well, what if that person who left the job left, in the situation that you describe, and they run over to Glassdoor and they're gonna leave some commentary about their former employer, and here's what's going to say. Now your new talent is going to be affected by that. So that's some really great insights. Let's talk a little bit about generations at work, because this is a real hot topic. Kevin, jump on board with us. This is something that everybody's talking about, which is, how do I deal with millennials? And Kevin's here because O and I are Gen Xers, and Kevin's our millennial in the mix, and brings an interesting and valuable perspective that we otherwise wouldn't have. And some interesting things are happening in the workplace. By 2025, 75% of working age people are going to be millennials. Generation Z is coming right up. So in a minute, your managers are going to be millennials, and your junior managers or your new employees are going to be Generation Z. At the same time, Gen X makes up 34% of the labor force. And at the same time, boomers are working longer than they ever have. So this is a diversity issue. 60% of people 55 to 64 are presently employed, and people used to, get the watch and retire at 65. That's not happening anymore. They want to work longer. They're energized and they're enthusiastic and they're excited to keep working. We often can look at this situation, guys, as a millennial issue. For whatever reason, that's making the headlines. We've got 3 generations, and a 4th is on its way. In 10 minutes, they're going to be here. we'll have 4 active generations at work. And each one of these generations comes with its own cultural identity, their own perspectives on the workplace, their own perspectives on relationships. This creates a lot of opportunity for either confusion and tension or dynamic leveraging of different skill sets, different talent, different ideas, different perspectives. Kevin, what's your thoughts on some of this as a millennial, as you're engaged in the workplace here at KG?
Yeah. I think for me personally, millennials are often seen as not a diversity issue. It's kind of like when we talk about them, we may just see them as an age group, and age doesn't inherently trigger in us any sort of, oh, this group is left out or this group doesn't have a place at the table. But with millennials, as with any dimension of diversity, you find that there's a profile of success. So between the ages of 35 and 45, that's when your earning potential is the highest. That's when you're most likely to be considered for leadership positions. So if you fall outside of 35 to 45 at this present moment, that would make you what we call an outsider. And an outsider just means that there's a harder kind of avenue to access than if you fall in this sweet spot. And so then you'll see things like I see, it's like, how could this person really have that depth and breadth of knowledge that's needed to lead this organization when he's only 25? Not taking into account that there's a lot of people who have founded and currently lead companies that they started well before 25 or right in the age range under 25. And there's a lot of employees that fall over that kind of 45 place that that still have really great insights and a lot to offer the organization. So it's one of those that doesn't inherently come up, but what you're doing is you're leaving people out of that kind of decision-making process, and that I'm really a part of the organization process, which then will leave people feeling a little bit gypped or left out of the equation, which leads to some of the things like you were talking about earlier with turnover, negative kind of feedback on their employee experience, which as business leaders nowadays, we don't want, Chris and Al.
So I'm going to jump in here and say I think this is generational diversity is a great topic, I think, to explore, in that I think can lead us into some other conversations, and looking at understandings that we get as we do D&I work really start to apply in all sorts of areas. And so what we talk about is having generational agility, this idea that like, well, how do you deal with millennials? It, for me, on some level, misses the point. Not because we don't want to learn about different generations, get a sense of the cultural context in which they're coming along, get a sense of what some of their priorities might be that might be different than Gen Xers, than Boomers, but because it locks us into, oh, I'm going to get myself a cheat sheet. So I'm going to, have my little index card, and I'll check my little index card every time I need to talk to Kevin, and maybe I'll bring up the right music artist, and then he'll do the work I want him to do. That's not where we want to live. We want to develop.
Snapchat.
Exactly. Let's take a selfie, Kevin. Okay, And so what we want to get to is an ability to interact effectively across lines of difference, and that's called cultural competence. In generational diversity, dealing with that is a great way to work on our cultural competence, because no matter where we are, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our organizations, clubs, if you're part of religious organizations, what have you, you're probably going to run into generational diversity. And your ability to recognize the value people bring, some of what Kevin already brought up, there's value to those. To someone who's 65, maybe he's been with the organization 25 years, has been in the industry 25, 30, 40 years, or who is coming from another industry and is bringing that wealth of professional experience to this new area. There's value there, but there's also value there with the person who's coming in, because new eyes see new things. And so rather than always go to the same people who understand that we've always done it that way, maybe we want to include some people in the conversation who know nothing of how we've always done it, because they might point out a way we could do things better. I always love that Henry Ford quote when he said that if he asked people what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, somebody's going to walk in our door and say, what if we build a car? And we don't want to miss the opportunity to be the first one building a car, because we're stuck on, this is the way we always done it, and what do you know, kid, right? So there's an ability to interact across these lines of difference that's really going to serve us well. And it's not in one direction, and it's not one generation, because I guarantee you in 10 years, 15 years, whether it's Generation Z, whatever, whatever the next behind them is going to be called, everyone will say, they're entitled. They've come in. They said that about Generation X when we got into the workforce. We were entitled and we didn't want to earn anything. It's funny how this always happens. Every generation has its description. Maybe it's just a dynamic around diversity. And if we get accustomed to being inclusive, we'll have a greater understanding of why we might feel the way we do about people of other generations.
And I think
Any thoughts from you, Chris?
Well, yeah, there are some interesting things that are happening, as you mentioned, though, around the emerging workforce, these new generations that are not just coming in, but that are taking in significant positions of impact because they understand the marketplace in a unique way, because they understand social, political issues in a unique way, because they engage with the world in a unique way, and they have a different perspective. So some of those things that are happening alongside this generational mix that's happening, 48%, it comes down to reflections on gender identity. So only 48% of Generation Z identify as exclusively heterosexual, compared to 65% of millennials. And over half of Generation Z knows someone who goes by gender neutral pronouns like they or them, compared to 43% of millennials. So when we go back to the beginning, we talk about how diversity, it's just a fact. These are facts. Like, we can go stomping through the streets about them if we want to. It doesn't change the fact that these are facts. The emerging workforce has a different sensibility about gender identity than the millennial or the Gen X or the boomer workforce. This is going to impact the way that we are seeing our workplace. It's going to impact those things. And it can either be sort of hysterical conversations about bathrooms, or it can be reasoned discussions about the talent that and the skills and abilities and the unique perspectives that everyone brings to help leverage the organization. So Kevin, as you think about that, and as you live in a world where we see this stuff all the time, what comes to mind for you in ways that organizations can, again, I'm always trying to come back to, let's not just have this be an intellectual exercise, team. What can the folks on the other end of the webinar take with them today when it comes to some of these difficult but interesting and important issues? What are some thoughts, Kevin, that you have around gender identity and where generational agility is concerned?
Yeah, I think the first is to examine your profile of success, because you find that with any dimension of diversity, there's an insider group and an outsider group, and it doesn't always have to be that it's Gen Xers now or baby boomers, because it's kind of a moving target, right? And so if you have a large millennial organization, which I've seen in my work, you may be doing things like office happy hours. You may be doing things a little bit more kind of putting yourself out there, more of a social capacity, a social tone to your company. And then when you try and bring on a baby boomer or later in their kind of age range Gen Xer, those people will still feel left out, even though they fall in that traditional profile of success. So first is examining your profile of success. Second is putting in place levers so that you can get these marginalized generational groups insights on how the company is operating and also how you're making business decisions. So if you look at the taxi industry, they're an industry that has come under heavy fire financially based on app-based riding like Uber or Lyft, et cetera. And if you had brought in a younger workforce and really surrounded your executive team with younger colleagues who may be more tech prone, as we just understand from the baseline of these generations, the taxi industry might have been able to come up with an app like Uber before Uber had the chance to kind of put them out of business. So you really need to make sure that the insights of your people are heard, and as O was saying earlier, appreciated. Because if they're heard but there's nothing put in place to implement them, it's still going to feel like you're not being heard. And the third is just to examine how you develop people. So being very transparent about where you see them fitting into your organization, because everybody wants to say that millennials are going to up and leave after a year or 2 years. I personally have been with my company for 3 years now, and I don't have any plans of moving. And that's because they really take my insights into account and they make me a leader within the company. And so I feel very loyal. Loyalty is a human emotion that every worker possesses. And so if you develop your people and make them feel like the next generation of leaders in your company, even if there may not be any avenue for them to really lead now, they will still stay with you knowing that they're entrusted to the company 5-10 years from now.
Interesting.
I want to jump in on the gender identity side of that conversation, because I think there's some simple things we can do even in the immediate, and we can do as individuals. And one example that was brought up to me actually by one of our strategic partners actually was that we could put in our signature, our email signature, our preferred pronouns. Now, although my preferred pronouns are probably the ones that people would guess by looking at me, what I say by putting that into my email signature is, I recognize this dimension of diversity. I recognize that not everyone identifies the way that we might expect or the way that we might want, and that I'm saying on a certain level to anyone who receives an email from me, I'm exhibiting a level of inclusion. I'm letting you know that that's something that matters to me. And there's simple things like that that we can do. Really, anyone could do that, right? Preferred pronouns, he, him, his, right? We could do something like that and start to set the groundwork and be that change we want to see, so to speak. We can be that change we want to see in even that small and simple way. Another thing around gender identity, as you said, we're moving toward more and more of the workforce seeing gender and gender identity in ways that maybe previous generations didn't. We're not going to hold on. Not only, again, it's like that joke in the conference room. It's not just that we're not going to hold on to the person who chooses, to identify in a non-binary way or what have you. We're also going to lose some people who maybe, like me, identify, he, his, him, but go, do I really want to be in an organization where that's such an issue, or that's really uncomfortable, or where I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing a friend of mine to, the company picnic? Maybe not. Maybe I want to be somewhere else where the vibe's a little bit different and where I'm feeling accepted, not just because of how I identify, but who my people are, who my family members may be. I think we're really moving to a place where we're going to have that level of openness and inclusion again, or get left behind. And I think the whole gender identity issue in question is one that has moved at an unbelievable rate. I think that conversation has progressed in the last 10 years in a way that I don't know that any other brand of conversation around this has, or any other dimension has sort of propelled this way in terms of gay marriage and all these issues that have come up. That's either, gender expression, sexuality, all these things. Those who aren't on board, I think in another 10 years, truly will be viewed as dinosaur organizations. Who will want to work there?
So, and I think what's interesting there, Kevin, we'll talk to you in another couple minutes. One of the things that's interesting about that, and all the things that both of you are sharing, is while we've talked about all these things happening in the workforce, the exact same things are happening to your marketplace. So your buyers are changing. Your buyers are evolving. Your buyers are becoming different. So let's turn our conversation just a little bit to how inclusive strategies help our buyers and help us from a perspective. You shared earlier in our conversation when we were talking about gender. It actually is that companies in the top 25% for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have above average financial returns. More gender diverse companies have a 15% higher return. And diversity in the C-suite is key. For every 10% increase in racial and ethnic diversity on the senior executive team, which, if you've got a team of 10, you just add one person, earnings rose 0.8%. I think one of the reasons for this, Orlando, is it goes back to many of the things that we've been talking about. When you bring different thoughts, perspectives, attitudes, cultural backgrounds into the decision-making process, you both avoid hysterical errors, which we see all the time in every headline, where somebody put an ad out that was insensitive, or somebody used some kind of a marketing ploy that was the wrong approach, or just tweeted the wrong thing. You're more likely to avoid those things when you've got more diversity making decisions, and then you're better understanding and better relating to your marketplace. I saw an ad for Las Vegas come
Mhm.
through my Twitter feed. And it was an ad of two people talking about getting married in Vegas. And the one was saying, I can't, my parents would just be so upset if I got married in Vegas. And it's like a 2-minute short film where they keep coming back to Vegas and they keep coming back to Vegas. And every time they say, oh, we should get married. I can't, my parents would totally not like that. And then at the end, they go in and the whole family is there, including the parents. Well, you know what? It was actually two women that were getting married. That didn't matter to the heart of the story, but it was two women getting married. Apple has a whole campaign similar. It's about using your iPhone in photography at summer weddings. It happens to be that all the weddings are same-sex couples. Or, I've seen advertisements from Cheerios where we've got a black dad and we've got a white mom and we've got our lovely daughter enjoying some Cheerios, at the kitchen table. Sometimes it doesn't take a big dramatic social statement to just inject some diversity into your marketing, because the people that you've embraced or that you've entrusted to lead your marketing in this instance have said, we're going to bring a bunch of different diversity in here. So when we're kicking ideas around, we've got a nice background of things. So what are some thoughts you have on the importance of that in the marketplace where we're reaching our buyer, our customer?
Well, I think there are a couple of levels to it. And I think there's a level I don't know is always considered, but that I'll bring up. And that Cheerios ad is a great example. The first time I saw that from Cheerios, right, as a brand, I consciously bought Cheerios for months thereafter. Not buy other cereals, I buy Cheerios as well. I move in and out. But for several months after that choice, I decided to vote with my dollars. I decided somewhere someone's taking stock of is printing out a report about, well, how'd sales do in that quarter? And if I can help to say, yes, please, more of that, then I want to do that. And I don't think I'm alone. I think for some people out there, and it's not necessarily, oh, I see my diversity. It's funny you mentioned that Vegas ad. I also noticed that. And I thought it was brilliant not to make it about that. They just were. And their reactions weren't any different. They were two humans who loved each other, who decided to spend their lives together, and whose families decided to participate in a really beautiful surprise. The fact that they were both women was beside the point in terms of the story that was being told, but not beside the point in terms of the message that was being delivered, which was, everybody's welcome in Vegas, right? There was nothing about race there. There was nothing about, introverts and extroverts. There was nothing about any of that, right? But what it signals is everybody's welcome here. Everybody should come here. And so I think that's one level. Another is that I think it challenges sometimes what we view as defaults in certain positions.
One of the things that has been something we've talked about again and again today, and as we get into sort of tactical, practical, actionable things that organizations can do, there's a great quote by a writer named Matthew Iglesias who writes for Slate, and he's got an article called "Diverse Groups Make Better Decisions." And this, I feel like, is this rounds out almost everything that we've been talking about so far today. And his quote is, "Nobody knows everything, and no group of people knows everything, but a peculiar attribute of homogeneous groups is that they can be unusually blind to what they don't know." So where that comes, rubber meets the road with that is there's a story from Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO of Facebook, and she used to work at Google. And when she was pregnant, she was trying to go to work, and she had to park clear across the parking ramp at like 7 months pregnant or something. And she hustled into work, and she was kind of fuming the whole time. And she right away went up to the CEO in the C-suite's office, and she said, "We need more parking for pregnant women close to the door." And they said, yeah, that's a great idea. They would have not thought of that on their own. It wouldn't have been an issue of the many issues that they're tackling every day. They wouldn't have thought of that on their own. So for me, that's an illustration of that inclusive strategies helps organizations just make better decisions. We talk about it throughout the day. If you have a more diverse hiring team, you're going to see things that other people don't see. You're going to bring perspective that can help the team at large. If you've got more diverse business leadership, you're going to make better decisions for your marketplace, because different angles are going to be seen that not everybody who kind of fits whatever status quo might be prevalent are accommodate. And it's important to think about that from diversity and inclusive strategies. I think it's important to think we can make this as simple as, let's bring more people that aren't like everyone else, that maybe even are marginalized or misrepresented or underrepresented. Let's bring more of those people into our conversations. Maybe that's an age thing, maybe that's a gender identity thing, maybe that's a generational thing, or maybe that's a race thing, but let's be intentional about bringing those people into a different conversation than they're used to and that we're used to.
Yes. And I will say this, and then I'll go back to the chat, Chris. We talk a lot about groupthink in our work, but we call it group bias. And so when we talk about bias, essentially we're talking about a preference for or against. And so when you have these homogenous teams like you're talking about, Chris, what you're really doing is leaving yourself susceptible to group bias. And I think group bias, like you're talking about, is where you as a team have just kind of a collective decision making, which is very siloed. So when you talk about issues, when you talk about things, you've been together so long and you kind of come from a similar background, be it that you're Ivy League, be it that you're Irish Catholic, be it whatever it may be, you're going to think about things and process them the same way, which is leaving you to the blind spots that diverse teams would bring to you. Any thoughts on that, O? And keep those questions coming, everybody. We appreciate. I'm getting some great questions.
Awesome.
I love it.
Yeah, I think one thing to look at in terms of group bias is that when we keep when we don't diversify our teams, that can become truth. And so we can I think a lot of that does lead to what we're seeing in terms of that statistic that was given with the resumes. Not necessarily, but we want a certain type of person. We want a person from a certain type of school. Well, we have to look sometimes at our pipeline. Which campuses are we visiting if we do campus visits? Which schools are we valuing if we're looking at resumes and valuing certain schools over others? So when you have that diversity, all of a sudden someone in the room might be able to say, well, as a matter of fact, that's a great law school. I actually, I've worked with people who've come from it. You just increase the probability that you're going to have that ability to see more. And one of the examples in terms of that group bias that I like to highlight as a sports fan is if your favorite sports team were only to recruit from one school or one conference, you would probably be upset. There's a nation or a world full of talent from which you'd like them to select. Well, the same is true for our organizations, no matter what industry we're in. So we want to make sure that we're not falling into that group think, that we're opening up, looking into those blind spots like Kevin was just mentioning, because there's value in those. We avoid missteps, but also, and I really want to stress this, we're looking toward what we can do at a higher level once we're there. So how are we bringing different people in, and how are we, extrovert, introvert, another great example. How are we running meetings, right? How are we running meetings? If every meeting is very brainstormy and who thinks quick on their feet, you're missing out. You're missing out on the person who needs to sleep on it. By the time they've slept on it, everybody's moved on. Why not have a pre-read? Why not have an email that chain that can go on for 24 hours after the meeting for some thoughts that bubble up later? It's no one's sitting down in their office, I don't think, saying, what we're going to do? We're going to oppress introverts. But we're still having that impact, and we're still losing the value of thoughtful individuals who, unlike me, I'm 7 words into my sentence before I figure out what I'm going to say. Some people actually like to figure out what they're going to say before they say it, which, doesn't even compute for me, but I understand they're out there.
And the value that is brought, that's a unique perspective, that because you slept on it, you brought something that nobody else here with our bubbly personalities and our talking over each other and our wait till you finish talking so I can without even listening to you we can fill a room full of these personalities that can be really dynamic and energizing and exciting. But then we need these processors, and we need these thought provokers, and we need these doers and these mechanical thinkers. And we've got a woman on our team she's the how. She always says, I always jump to how. So Orlando and I will come with all these pie in the sky crazy ideas, and she'll ground us in all right, but how? And if we didn't have that perspective, wow, we wouldn't get much done. We would just have great ideas all the time,
And I'll add to that, there's been so much learning in that for me. So now I recognize when you and I are talking, I recognize we better get to some how here, right?
This is exciting, but how is this ever going to go out and get off the ground? Right.
Exactly. Or to bring someone in who's going to provide that. So there's a level of awareness also from having that interaction and to seeing the value of it that's actually improved me personally. I see the need for it. And if I'm not able to provide it in a given situation, I recognize the need for it and I seek that brand of input into the process. So I'm better for having had that interaction and that exposure. And so I think that's also going to be true in organizations, that once you start to recognize, oh, well, look at this marketplace, or how we might market to women a little bit differently than we in mass, than we market to men around something. I've seen, things about that. You're going to start to incorporate those things. You're just going to become more powerful as an individual as well.
Well, let's get to some of the questions we have. Before we do that, Kevin, can you share just a little bit about the Kaleidoscope Group and how it can help some of these organizations that we started with, coming from diverse perspectives? What are a few ways that we would like to continue this conversation with people on the other end?
Yeah, so I appreciate it, Chris. And it's hard for me because I'm getting all these great questions in the chat box, and I want to go into such great detail with you all. But we understand that at the Kaleidoscope Group, our motto is real people having real conversations to create real change. And we understand that your organization in your diversity and inclusion journey may be just starting off, maybe very far advanced and looking for some supplementary measures. You fall at all different places on this diversity and inclusion journey. And so we really want to understand, where are you? What are some of your challenges nowadays? And then provide a little bit of nuanced feedback in terms of how you can move forward and what some kind of considerations might be. So you see down there, it says visit kgdiversity.com/let's talk. And there you'll find my calendar, where you can schedule some time with me and one of our subject matter experts, and we'll be able to really provide some of that more pointed feedback on how you can move this topic along within your organization.
Just sort of piggybacking there, also recognizing, we talk about the D&I journey, and organizations are on a journey, individually we're on a journey, and I think there's a lot of value to recognizing and appreciating, honoring the journey. And so part of the value of that conversation and looking at things in the way that Kevin is describing is that we're able to think about where you are and where you want to go, and really get clear and customized around how you can get from one to the other in a way that honors your culture, honors what exists, and adds this new element, not as as some side piece that's over there or some box that's checked, but a way that you really elevate what you have to a whole new level. So highly recommending engaging in that conversation just to get a real sense of what it might look like on the ground, in real life, in real time, because there are a lot of ways that this can be approached that wouldn't be as disruptive, I think, as some people might think on one end, or as superfluous as people might think on the other. And we really weave into what it is that you do and how you do it, and now help you do it in this inclusive and more powerful way.
And I think that there's a sort of a cost to complacency. We all come into this, even the folks on the webinar, you came in with something going on, right? We've got a partner who last week said, what's your elephant in the room? Well, there's something going on, and we've explored a whole bunch today. And as Kevin points out, it'd be great to just go through every single person who's here and just say, so what are you going through? Well, we'd love to do that. So let's just have that conversation. There's nothing to it. There's no big hassle. Let's just have that discussion, figure out what's cooking with you, and how we might be part of the secret sauce to make things in the kitchen even better. Barb, we've got one more question we want to ask all of you before we get to your important questions, and that is, what do you want to talk about next? So we love having these webinars around what's pressing for you. So after the things we talked about today, are you struggling at all, or want to talk more about how to get your executives to buy in? Because sometimes we hear that. We hear a lot of, this is exciting, but how can we get the C-suite to really get on board? Well, we can help. Or do you want to have a webinar about how can we better assess where we are and how to get started with D&I? Or would you like to have a webinar about D&I strategies to help us get and keep the best talent? So if you were to sign up for another webinar with us this summer, what would be most attractive to you? This just helps us to make sure that we're talking about the things that are interesting to you. So just, Barb, let's just go ahead and spend a couple seconds on this.
Yep, we have the poll already up and launched and people are voting. So we'll leave this up for a few more seconds and capture some information from our audience. Thank you all for the great questions you've been submitting today already. We're going to address those in more depth here in just a moment. And we're glad to see so much interaction from everybody. Obviously, this is a really key topic and very important in so many organizations across the country, across the world. We've got some international folks joining us today.
Oh, fun.
So it's definitely starting to bubble to the top, probably past due in some organizations. So thank you all for voting here. And we'll just give it a couple more seconds and then we'll show our results here on the screen.
Something I want to put in the mix as we're thinking about next time. I know there's, oh, wow.
That's amazing. That's
Wow.
great. All right, we'll do all.
We've got work cut out for us. That's great. One thing, again, sort of in the category of, yes, we're going to talk about organizations, and the conversations that you'll have with Kevin will allow you to look at that and think about how you can be a change agent and all these types of things. But think about the things that you can do to just start behaving more inclusively. And one example I would give of that is expanding your sounding board. And that's where we describe the people who you tend to go to around making decisions or asking for advice or bouncing your ideas off of them. Start to take stock of what they look like. And if they look like, think like, are like you in a whole lot of ways, how might you switch that up? Who might you add? Who might you ask a different question? Maybe, on a given topic that's not a generational topic in itself, maybe you go out of your way to ask a boomer, a Gen Xer, a Gen Y, or a millennial, right? And all of a sudden, you might find that you're getting some different perspectives and viewpoints around these things. And then you'll start to recognize the value. You'll start to exercise that muscle. You'll be developing your cultural competency. And then that kind of thing becomes infectious. It becomes just the practice. That's how culture happens, right? So yes, all these things are important and we want to get executive buy-in, and all these things are critical for our organizations, but also starting with you, that's something that you can right now, end of this webinar, decide, next time I have a decision to make, I'm going to ask some different people and see what their input might be.
That's great insight, all. Thanks. Kevin, what are some questions we got?
Thanks, Chris. So my friend Vanessa asked a question. How do you convince organizations who have been truly successful in the past, but have been homogeneous? So how do you kind of articulate the business value, diversity, and inclusion for an organization where it's like, hey, we've been having a good deal of success. Why would we kind of mix things up?
Well, I think there are two basic things to look at there. Some of the statistics we've already talked about during this hour. The reality is that just because we're doing great doesn't mean that we can't do better. And the numbers are the numbers. The reality is the reality. So adding one, person of color into leadership, translating into these things statistically, what it means to put women in leadership in terms of our revenue generated or where we're going to rank in our industry. All those things just are. So just because we're doing great doesn't mean that we can't do better. But I also think what got us here isn't necessarily going to get us there. And so as the world changes, so too do our organizations have to change. And just like you talked about, whether it's Uber and cabs, whether it's Netflix and Blockbuster, whether it's, these were all companies that were doing fantastically. And they missed the opportunity to, I'll expose myself as a sports fan a little more. They missed the opportunity. Wayne Gretzky talked about not skating to where the puck is, hockey legend, not skating to where the puck is, but skating to where the puck is going to be. Your organization's got to skate to where the puck's going to be. And the reality is that if you're not dealing with these topics and you're not addressing these issues, you're skating to where the puck is and you're going to lose.
I think another question to ask is great according to whom. And so your revenue might be on point, your profits might be on point, you might have had growth, that's fantastic. Apple comes to mind for me, who's a company that obviously in the last 2 decades has just outperformed everyone. But a couple years ago, they had one of their big keynote presentations, and the Twitterverse remarked, "This is a lot of white dudes up here." There were no women, there were no people of color that were represented. So their reputation in that moment, when they wanted the focus to be on all the innovation, the new products, everybody get your checkbooks out, we got something new coming out. Instead, it was on something else, and the conversation had to change, and they had to think and have a little bit of a heart-to-heart with themselves and say, okay, so that's interesting feedback that we maybe weren't expecting. What are we going to do about it? And you saw changes, not just in who was showing up for the presentations, but even in who they were hiring. Angela Ahrens runs all of the retail for Apple. That was a decision made with inclusive strategies in mind. So I think those are some things to ask. Kevin, do you have another question for us?
I do. I think that great insights. I appreciate those answers myself. What if an organization, this one comes from Val, appreciate the question, Val. What if an organization has a recruiting team bringing in a diverse mix of candidates, however, the hiring managers may not see the value or may not pick those people? And so I think the kind of deeper question is, what if you have a leader and the individual contributors are contributing to the diversity and inclusion strategy, but the leader may not be kind of carrying it through?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One, Doug Harris, our CEO, one of the stories that he told me that was great. There's some folks who were reporting to a CEO, and they went in and said, look, do you want us to hire the best candidate, or do you want us to hire diverse candidates? And he said, yes. And I think there's value to bringing that mindset into the conversation, that we're looking to do both those things. Process is going to be huge potentially there. There can be biases in place. It doesn't have to be a nefarious thing, but if we can get clear on, there seems to be this impact in the process, maybe having more people doing the interviewing, maybe having maybe having some blind evaluation as part of the process, so that we see who really advances. Maybe it's not all just about an interview. Maybe there's something that could test proficiency in certain areas, and that would be a part of the conversation too. So I think there's some elements that can be adding a level of awareness, but I would really look at the overall process, and maybe it shouldn't all ride on one person's preference in itself. There might be a final decision maker, but you could bring some different input into the conversation that might impact what we're seeing in that given situation.
I think, team, that we want to respect everyone's time. I could talk for another 2 hours, but let's conclude today's webinar with our great humble thanks to all of us that joined today. Orlando and I will personally go through with Kevin all the questions that came through, and where we can reach out and make a personal connections in an email or whatever with you to help answer that question. You can count on us to do that. So we will stay in touch with you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Orlando. Thank you as always, Kevin. Thank you as always, team behind the scenes. Appreciate you, and everyone else. We hope to see you for one of those other 3 webinars that we're going to make sure we have happening before the end of the year. Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Thank you all. Have a great day.